Hey there guys, how are you today and welcome to my review of the 2018 Spanish Grand Prix which took place at the Circuit de Catalunya last weekend. Of course, the question on everybody's lips going into the weekend was whether the Spanish Grand Prix could be as good as the previous few Grand Prix we've had in recent races. Of course, this track doesn't normally produce good races, but let's find out what happened in 2018 as we go on to review the 2018 Spanish Grand Prix. As is traditional at the Spanish Grand Prix, teams put lots of updates for the first European race of the season. So as you can see, Ferrari brought new wings for the Halo, and McLaren have made a new front wing, completely redesigned their car, but will it work? That's the big question that everybody had to talk about. For a change, the free practice sessions were pretty exciting this weekend. Of course, we saw Robert Kubica in the Williams in free practice one. First time he's taken part in an F1 session since the 2010 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, and he was significantly faster than his teammate Lance Stroll, possibly suggesting Williams don't have their best driver in the race car. But in general, lots of drivers were making mistakes. Ricciardo crashed in FP1, and Brendan Hartley crashes Toro Rosso in FP3, ruining his qualifying chances. So it was a pretty interesting free practice session with drivers struggling in windy conditions, and I guess they all had to hope that by qualifying in the race, they had got rid of all of their mistakes to have a clean run and a good shot at pole position. The Mercedes pairing of Lewis Hamilton and Valtteri Bottas were able to lock out the front row in qualifying and took a 1-2 race finish, with Lewis Hamilton coming home ahead of Valtteri Bottas to extend his World Championship lead. I would say this is one of Lewis Hamilton's strongest weekends in a while, certainly since he won his fourth World Championship back at Mexican Grand Prix in 2017. He got pole position. Okay, it was very close to Bottas, admittedly, and he won by over 15 seconds. It was as if we were in 2015 again, with Hamilton dominating the field, and now it's a 17-point lead over Sebastian Vettel in the World Championship. We also didn't hear much from Hamilton on team radio in terms of whining or anything, which is quite rare for him, so well done there, Lewis. And it looks like he's really made up for his sluggish start to the season, and he's told the press that he's feeling rejuvenated. So all is good in Camp Lewis, or Camp Hamilton, whatever you would call it, while Bottas also had a fairly strong weekend. He just missed out on pole by, I believe it was 0.04 of a second, if I'm right. He did get jumped by Vettel at the start of the race. You'd expect that because Bottas started on the dirty side of the grid, while Vettel started in P3 on the clean side. But Bottas was only able to get back ahead when Ferrari messed up Vettel's strategy and made him do an additional pit stop. Bottas has been pretty consistent throughout the season, especially in the last few races. But is he maybe the nearly man? He's nearly won a few races, and he nearly got a pole position. Being the nearly man, that's not good enough for Formula 1, and I reckon he really needs to win a race very, very soon if he's going to be firmly in the 2018 title race. Going into the Grand Prix, and if you look at my predictions video and stuff, I thought Ferrari were going to dominate the Spanish Grand Prix. That's what seemed to be the common argument. They've been the fastest car this season so far, it seemed. And I thought they were going to dominate, because normally the fastest car wins in Spain. But maybe Mercedes is the fastest car, and Ferrari isn't. So yeah, it looks like Ferrari lost some of their pace. It might have just been a setup issue, setup mistake with the car. Or maybe Mercedes update has pushed them ahead, or a Ferrari update has slowed them down. It's hard to tell. And even at the start, Hamilton pulled away from Vettel pretty easily in the first stint. He was able to put in some fantastic laps, and Vettel simply fell behind. Ferrari then lost Vettel 2 places after they called him into the pits under the virtual safety car, and then despite Verstappen having a damaged front wing, Vettel didn't even get close to overtaking him. So maybe we can question Ferrari's pace in comparison to the Red Bulls as well. So I don't know what happened with Ferrari this weekend, but is it time to worry for Vettel, or was it just a bad weekend, and will they be back stronger than ever in Monaco? While it was a really difficult weekend for his teammate Kimi Raikkonen, engine failure in FP2, and it ultimately repeated itself in the Grand Prix. He was behind Sebastian Vettel throughout the whole weekend, and I think his early season pace that I've talked about quite a bit on the channel, did not really get shown this weekend, which was kind of sad because I want to see Raikkonen fight for the championship. And I guess we have to hope he has a strong Monaco Grand Prix, and I hope his reliability issues don't cause any grid penalties in Monaco, because that, of course, would be a disaster on a track where it's impossible to overtake. Another driver to have a pretty poor weekend, surprisingly, was Daniel Ricciardo. Normally, he's obviously one of the best, but he just didn't really get going this weekend. He had a crash in the first practice session, which obviously delayed the team's progress and set up work in practice sessions. And he generally has had a poor weekend, sitting behind Verstappen basically throughout the whole race. He even managed to have a spin under the virtual safety car, which is kind of poor, and he has never really recovered the time he lost. He didn't lose any positions, and he still came home in P5, which is pretty decent, I guess, 10 points for him. But it was a pretty difficult weekend. He did get the fastest lap of the race, which is something. So it shows that on occasion, on some laps, the car did have some good pace. But for whatever reason, things just didn't fall into place for Daniel Ricciardo at the Spanish Grand Prix. While Max Verstappen finally had a clean weekend. Yes, he did have a spin in practice, but pretty much all the drivers did. And there was a small incident with Lance Stroll at the end of the virtual safety car period where they kind of collided with each other, and Verstappen broke off Summer's front wing, but he managed to drive the car well despite damage, and he came home in P3 to prove a lot of his doubters, probably including me, wrong. So yeah, a good weekend for the Dutchman, but ultimately not the best weekend for the Red Bull team, who are hoping to maybe close the gap a bit at the Spanish Grand Prix. Most of the teams throughout the midfield had a mixed weekend in terms of results and luck and performance, and probably a key example is Renault. So their lead driver Nico Hülkenberg had a very challenging weekend. He had a mechanical issue in the first qualifying session, which meant he had to start towards the back of the grid. And then he got caught up in the Roman Grosjean incident, which of course I'm going to talk about later. And he was out of the Grand Prix. So a very disappointing weekend for the German driver, who until now has had a very strong and promising start to the 2018 season. Of course, with the crash with Grosjean, that he was just unlucky there, Nico Hülkenberg. And he was unlucky for reliability. So yeah, a difficult and bad luck weekend for him there. And he'll be hoping to come back stronger in Monaco. But his teammate Carlos Sainz, who of course was at his home race at the Spanish Grand Prix, had a pretty strong weekend. He got into Q3 and scored some points in front of his home fans. He'll be delighted with that. He beat Fernando Alonso. Sainz came in P7 in the race, so very impressive result. He even managed to do that despite some mechanical issues towards the end of the race. But he did well to hold. He did obviously very well to hold off his hero and fellow Spaniard Fernando Alonso. So yeah, a mixed weekend for Renault, but ultimately they'll be happy because they got P4 in the Constructors' Championship now, which was of course their aim at the start of the season. So all round pretty good, and they're going to be hoping that any mechanical issues don't repeat themselves later in the season. McLaren came into the Spanish Grand Prix full of optimism that their new front wing and general their new updates will push them further up the grid. And I would say, on the whole, it didn't go as well as it would have helped. Alonso had another strong weekend. He is the only driver, apart from Hamilton and Vettel, to score a point in every single Grand Prix this season, which is obviously impressive, but we are only had 5 races now. Alonso did get into Q3 for the first time this season. He qualified in 8th place, I believe, and he stayed in the points despite losing a few positions at the start of the race. I think McLaren have improved a bit, but maybe not as much as we hoped, or maybe we hoped too much. You know, I don't know if it would have been too optimistic or too ambitious to ask them to be right at the front of the grid, where we know McLaren deserves to be and certainly should be. Monaco will certainly be a test of their chassis, which they claim to be one of the best on the grid, but considering they're still behind Red Bull and Renault, that can't be true. So it'll be a good test fit Monaco, where engine power doesn't matter. But in general, for Alonso, it was a difficult weekend in comparison to at least of what he would have hoped. but he got points in front of his home fans, so he won't be too disappointed. While Van Dorn simply didn't have the pace for his teammate and was struggling in the midfield. He hadn't DNF'd due to an engine issue, McLaren's first reliability issue in the race this season. Considering the past few seasons, it's pretty impressive that they've gotten so many races without a reliability issue now they've got the Renault engine. The Renault engine seemed to struggle in fairly cool conditions at the Spanish Grand Prix, which was pretty intriguing. Hopefully it's something they sort out before the rest of the season. Probably the most dramatic moment of the whole weekend was Roman Grosjean making a mistake on lap 1 at the start of the race, and at the same time managing to take out Nico Hulkenberg and Pierre Gasly, as well as himself. So another really poor weekend for the French driver. He made lots of mistakes in practice, and yeah, he spun at turn 3 and then came across the track when he could have gone the other way when he knew he was going to be out of the race, and took out Hulkenberg and Gasly. He blamed dirty air from his teammate, actually, Kevin Magnussen. But surely all midfield drivers have to deal with dirty air at the start of the race, where all the cars are so close to each other on track. But it was just simply a mistake by Roman Grosjean, and it caused a big crash. And it ultimately could have been a lot worse. And you know what? I'm going to go for it. I'm going to say Roman Grosjean should not be in the sport. He should be banned from the sport, in my opinion. I thought he was disgusting this weekend. And he needs to sort himself out fast or get out of the sport. It's not the first time he's caused a crash at the start of the race. Look at Belgium 2012. And in fact, many races in 2012, he's caused an incident at the start of the race. He simply doesn't deserve to be in the sport. I don't see what he's done in terms of pace. He hasn't been that impressive. Maybe I'm going too far. You can tell me in the comments what you think. You can shout at me or something if you think I'm wrong. But he doesn't deserve to be in the sport. And you know what? I would love to see Robert Kubica have a go in the Haas. I don't know if he would be Ferrari's choice to go in their B team. He probably wouldn't. But how awesome would that be to have Robert Kubica in the Haas? I would love that personally. Or maybe Pascal Wehrlein. But okay, I know that's not going to happen realistically. But Roman Grosjean needs to get out of the sport now. While Kevin Magnussen, his teammate, had a strong weekend. So of course Roman Grosjean blamed him for his crash on lap 1, in the same way as the team blamed Ericsson for Grosjean's mistake in Baku. So maybe now the hashtags should blame Magnussen. But yeah, a strong weekend for the Haas driver. He got into Q3 and had a pretty consistent race, scoring some great points, finishing P6. Only negative is an incident with Charles Leclerc in the first practice session, where he was accused of binge driving. He seemed to squeeze Leclerc a bit as if they were racing, which you don't really do in the first practice session or any practice session. I guess the weekend showed he has the speed for Formula 1, but I reckon he still needs to calm down a bit. And we're going to see through the rest of the season whether he's able to do that. If we're honest, we didn't really hear much about the Force India driver Sergio Perez this weekend. You know, he had a pretty quiet weekend. He got into the points after the start. He qualified in Q2. But obviously he benefited from the crash at the start of the race and other people ahead of him retiring, including his teammate Ocon and of course Raikkonen. And he was able to get into P9 and get a couple of crucial points for Force India. And in general, Force India seemed to have improved a bit in recent races. Of course, they had a slow start to the season. They were certainly the slowest team in the midfield. But I think they're starting to make some progress, which is generally the story of their season, most seasons. And hopefully we're going to see them soon in the fight for P4 in the Constructors. And I'll need Perez to be a big part of that. Of course, he did have his podium in Baku, but that was lucky. But here was a pretty impressive result for Force India, actually. While his teammate Esteban Ocon had some good pace this weekend, was also running in the points, but he had a disaster of the pit stop, and then an engine failure. I don't know if the pit stop caused overheating of the engine, which caused the failure, but it was a bit of a disaster for a race for Esteban Ocon, to be honest. And he'd be very disappointed that the first time for a long time that we're seeing a Mercedes engine break down during a Grand Prix. So pretty interesting there. I don't know if it overheated or what, but hopefully that'll be the only time he has any reliability issues in 2018. Another midfield team to not hit their full potential this weekend was Toro Rosso. So because of bad luck and mistakes, they just never managed to get results together this weekend. So Pierre Gasly was able to qualify in P10, so very impressive to get into the pole position shootout, especially with that Honda engine at the back. But he got caught up in the Grosjean crash, really unlucky to be in that crash. You can see, of course, the picture of him on the bike going back to the pit lane in the paddock. And yeah, the crash obviously ended his race. Very unlucky. Who knows where he could have come? He could have scored some good points at the weekend, which would have been great for the team and great for himself. But it just wasn't meant to be, I guess. While his teammate Brendan Hartley had a pretty difficult weekend. He had a huge crash in FP3 with the car near enough splitting in half, as you're about to see in the picture coming up now. And yeah, disaster for the team. Took ages to fix, obviously, and he wasn't ready for qualifying. Meant he started at the back of the grid. He made some progress, I believe, to finish in P12 ahead of Ericsson. But you know, of course, that's partly because loads of people retired from this race. There's quite a high attrition rate at the Grand Prix, including his teammate, of course. So yeah, I reckon Hartley needs a bit of improvement. Rumours are starting to build that Red Bull might kick him out of their program again. We know they can be pretty harsh. So yeah, I reckon he needs some improvement, and Monaco needs to be the place for that to happen. One of the teams who really impressed me this weekend was Sauber Alfa Romeo. So we'll start with Charles Leclerc. He got into Q2, and then he was able to gain positions during the race to score a point for a team. He was in the points by the end of lap 1, and he stayed there. He made no mistakes throughout the race, all the weekend really. He had a good battle with Fernando Alonso during the Grand Prix. Okay, he lost out in the end, but we know McLaren is faster than the Sauber Alfa Romeo. And in general, I would say of the drivers to come into the sport in the last couple of years, so you have to include Stroll, Gasly, Hartley, himself, obviously Leclerc, you know, that's himself, Sirotkin. I would say Leclerc is one of the strongest. I think he's been doing brilliantly this season, especially in the last couple of races. And I think we have to be really excited about his future in Formula 1. And he really showed what he can do at the Spanish Grand Prix. While his teammate Marcus Ericsson was outshone a bit by his teammates, but certainly didn't have a bad weekend. He had a period running in the points. Okay, he hadn't pitted yet, and he must have been on quite worn out tyres. And he showed his abilities to do defensive driving when battling Sainz. It was some great clean racing there. And you know, Marcus Ericsson, people don't always have a great opinion about him. But I was impressed with him when he was having this battle with Carlos Sainz, who was obviously on fresher tyres and a faster car. So yeah, he has to be pretty happy there. And all round a pretty decent and certainly better than expected weekend for Sauber Alfa Romeo. Finally, we have to talk about Williams. Of course, most of this, as always, is going to be pretty negative. But I guess we'll start with the positive. It was cool that Kubica got to drive the car in the first practice session. A bit of a shining light for the team there. Great to see him back in the Formula 1 car in an official session. And he was nearly a second faster than Lance Stroll on the same tyres. Okay, he only finished in P19, but that just shows how slow Williams are at the moment. And he actually said that the car was an embarrassment. It was embarrassing to drive it. So I think Kubica even doesn't like the car, and he's a test driver. So it's pretty depressing to hear that. For if you're a Williams fan, I'm not personally, but it would be if you are a Williams fan. And I guess they're going to have to make improvements. And the drivers in the car for the actual race had a pretty poor weekend. Lance Stroll crashed in qualifying when he was pushing too hard and obviously qualified towards the back of the grid. And he also made loads of mistakes during practice. And Sirotkin had a very, very scary moment in the Grand Prix just after the virtual safety car. So yeah, it was overall a very poor weekend for the team. And maybe we should start to consider questioning whether they got their best driver, Kubica, in the car. Or because if they don't put him in the car soon, he might be snapped up by another team. We've talked about Kubica coming back to the sport quite a bit recently. And really, I'd love to see him racing for Williams. So yeah, that was a Spanish Grand Prix. Overall, not the best race. The start was exciting with Grosjean's crash, and I told you my opinions about him, but not a lot of action. It was pretty clear throughout the whole race that Lewis Hamilton was going to win, and he had pace over the rest of the field. So yeah, that was the Spanish Grand Prix. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next week when I preview the 2018 Monaco Grand Prix.